Welcome to Michigan in Focus. I'm Bruce Walker, Great Lakes Regional Editor for the Center Square. In an era where we're more likely to hear about defunding police departments, Detroit's police department is seeking to increase its budget by $22 million. Most of that funding increase, about $13.5 million, would fund a bump in salaries and wages, while yet another $10 million would fund employee benefits. Meanwhile, planned operation costs in 2024 would drop by approximately $6 million. Joining me to discuss is the Center Square's managing editor, Tom Ganchard. Tom, you have reported on issues such as this for decades. Can you provide us with a little bit of background on this? I mean, is this something similar to other municipalities throughout the country where they're seeking money, but not a whole lot of it is actually going to protect and serve the public?
It's going to, well, police have a lot of issues, but let's start with the most important thing is how many employees do they have? If you remember, Detroit filed for bankruptcy, the city did in 2013. And in 2014, the first year out, in the police department, they had 2,769 employees. That's 2014. In 2022, they had 3,140 employees. So they have more employees than they did 9 years ago, their first year out of bankruptcy. They're not dealing with fewer people in the department. As a matter of fact, in 2021, they had 3,364 employees. So they're down, 220 employees from last year. So they have fewer employees in the department than they did last year. But they're still, if you look at the numbers, they have 400 more employees in 2022 as compared to 2014. The issue is, in terms of what they want the extra money for, they said was salaries. That was a big part of what the $22 million was going to go to. When you talk compensation for police officers, often what you read is the base salaries. And so the base salaries for a police officer in the city of Detroit starts out at $35,000 for a patrol officer and can go as high as $53,000. That's according to the union contract. But if you have any discussion about compensation, you have to include overtime. And the city of Detroit's overtime is a lot. If you look, they've had police officers or higher ranking people, lieutenants, sergeants, make as much as $162,000 in overtime.
That's on top of their normal salary?
That's on top of their salary, and that was pushing their income to over $280,000 a year. There's also a second rung of police officers that make $35,000 to $88,000 in overtime. That's in lieu on top of what their salary is. So when you talk about a police officer making $35,000, that same officer might make as much as $55,000, $60,000, and that is universal in most all departments. MLive several years ago ran a story about police officers starting out in Flint making less than a minimum wage. But what the mistake in the article was that they were quoting a salary that was, or a payment they were making while they were in the academy, not officially hired. The lowest income was in the city of Flint. When we checked it out 3 years ago, the lowest, the starting salary was $36,000 for a police officer. But we put a FOIA in for gross pay. There wasn't an employee there that made less than $50,000, and that's the same thing in Detroit. If you're starting out at $35,000, you have the opportunity to make thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars extra in overtime. The work is there. The other kind of interesting thing is that police and fire in just about every municipality make up almost half of the total spending of the city. So in Detroit, police and fire is $503.6 million in 2022. That's 42% of all spending. But what's kind of interesting is because inflation's so high. So like if you look in 2019, police and fire was $452 million. That went up in 2022 to $503.6 million. So that's like it's a $51 million increase in 3 years. But if you factor in inflation, because inflation's so high, in 2019, police and fire total spending was $505 million, which is less than the $503 they spent in 2022. So inflation is having an impact on spending in terms of, when you make comparisons. Because, in 3 years, $50 million or, $48 million seems like a lot. But when you factor in inflation, it's actually less spending in 2022 than compared to 2019.
Deeper into the story, there were revelations that Mayor Mike Duggan has proposed Detroit spend $10 million more for a community violence intervention program that would be called Shot Stoppers, and that would be funded by federal money through the American Rescue Plan, and that the city has 300, or the department, I should say, has 389 open positions, and that they're hiring civilians to fill some positions as the department restructures, and that the police officer pay raises approved last fall totaled $26 million. And they said that has helped in recruitment, including luring some people back to the department from other jobs or even out of retirement.
Well, let's talk about community policing programs. They, in 2019, they had 127 community policing programs. 2021, that dropped to 61. So they cut them in half. And so they lost half of their community policing programs. 2022, the city didn't release data. They didn't have it in their annual report because it missed the deadline. The amount of community programs they did as of 2021 was significantly cut compared to just, pre-pandemic. If they're going to start it up again, that would, I guess, be part of the effort to make up some of the programs that they've cut.
Listeners can keep up with this story and more at thecentersquare.com for more stories by Tom Gantert. This is Bruce Walker, Great Lakes Regional Editor for The Center Square. Please subscribe, and thank you for listening.
Freedom and liberty are important to all of us. If you're looking for civil, intellectual conversations with those shaping the future of freedom, try the Future of Freedom podcast with me, Scott Bertram. We speak with leaders across the country in the greater conservative and libertarian movements. In-depth conversations about where the next intellectual battles will happen across the country. It's the Future of Freedom podcast. Find it at americastalking.com or wherever you get your podcasts.